Support comes from Hampton Roads Community Foundation, carrying out your charitable wishes forever. Whether it's helping shelter animals, feeding the homeless, enhancing the arts, or supporting students. Learn more at leaveabequest.org.
Hello, everyone. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. The right to vote in America has undergone tremendous change since the founding of our country. The Constitution left voting rights to the states, and at that time, only white male property owners could vote. The 15th and 19th Amendments granted this right to African American men and women, respectively, but Jim Crow laws made it almost impossible for blacks to cast their ballot, even to the point of death. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 put the power of the federal government behind the vote, but now in 2021, we find ourselves in a fight for democracy and our right to cast our ballot. Up next on Another View, Dr. Eric Claville on voting in America. That's next after this national and local news from NPR and WHRV News.
Discussing today's topics from an African-American perspective, this is Another View.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. Close to 400 bills have been introduced this year in 48 state legislatures to restrict the right to vote. In Texas, Democratic legislators literally left the state in order to stop Republicans from enacting voting restrictions in the Lone Star State. Why is this happening? What does it mean for our constitutional right to vote? Why should we care? And more importantly, why is there so much public silence when this is such a serious issue? Joining us to talk about the right to vote is Dr. Eric Claville, the director of the Center for African American Public Policy at Norfolk State University and host of State of the Water. You hear it on WNSB-FM, Norfolk State Public Radio. Hey, Eric, how are you?
Doing great, Barbara. So glad to hear your voice.
Absolutely. One day we'll be able to sit in the studio together soon, huh?
That's right. That's right.
We really hope so. So voting rights activist Stacey Abrams says that we are entering Jim Crow 2.0. Are we?
I think we're already there. I have to agree with that. If you track the legislation that are various bills that are in the cycle right now, in legislatures across the country, as a matter of fact, 48 states themselves, in various provisions that have passed in 17 states. Mm-hmm. It is restricting access to the ballot box. It is Jim Crow 2.0. And Barbara, this was actually created by the Shelby County versus Holder U.S. Supreme Court decision, which struck down a key provision of the Voting Rights Act. And we'll talk more about the act, the Voting Rights Act itself, mm-hmm. its importance, and it's important not just then, but also today. But after that Supreme Court decision, Barbara, we saw a litany, just an onslaught of laws in various states start the process of passing, more specifically our neighbors to the south in North Carolina, where even in that particular voter ID, the strictest voter ID law at the time mm-hmm. that was passed in any state, we're talking 2015, 2016, the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is located here in Richmond, which covers North Carolina and also Virginia and several other states, stated that this law was targeted specifically at African Americans, quote, with almost surgical precision to disenfranchise them. And the governor at that time, Pat McCrory, appealed it to the U.S. Supreme Court, and Chief Roberts said that they would not hear the case. And by not hearing the case, it wasn't an opinion about the case, but they felt that the Fourth Circuit decision was going to stay. So with that, I have to agree. Again, this is Jim Crow 2.0 because voting, the power of the vote, by the late John Lewis, is the most powerful weapon we have mm-hmm. in our democracy.
So what's the goal? I mean, because I think people don't really think about it. I think that every 4 years, when the presidential election comes up, or the off years when we're doing congressional and local elections and so forth, the time comes and people go, "Oh yeah, I got to vote." But explain, Eric, why this is so critical.
Sure. Well, keep in mind, in our form of government, our democracy, we have the power of the ballot box. The power of the ballot box itself is provided to not only create laws and public policies in which we govern ourselves by in our localities, in our state, our commonwealth, and also federal government, but it also gives us the power to appoint individuals or elect individuals. I would say elect individuals to office, both in our localities, from the school board to the local city council to the state legislature, or here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, the General Assembly, and also in Congress, and then finally, of course, in the highest office of the land. And these individuals then have the power to select and appoint other individuals for various offices. More specifically, if we take a look at the U.S. Supreme Court, we understand that those individuals are not elected by the general public, but they are recommended by the president. They go before the Senate, and then after that, if they get the votes in the Senate, then they are appointed by the president for life. And not just the U.S. Supreme Court, but all federal benches in which individuals serve as justices and judges in those various capacities. So the vote basically is the mechanism that we have in our country, in our democracy, to craft laws and public policy and place individuals in position to govern us according to the will of the people. Now, the question becomes, who is the people? Now, of course, we can go back to, but we have to start with our U.S. Constitution. Our U.S. Constitution defined who the people were.
Well, and I was going to actually have you go back to some of that historical context, because when the Constitution was originally created, am I correct in that the states, they left the voting rights and so forth to the states, and it started out with just white men who owned property, and they were the only ones allowed to vote, right? And then,
so
go ahead.
Right. So states were given the power in order to lead out voting processes in their states. So that's why every state has a certification of voting. And then when we're looking at the president, then the certification of those records in the states are then certified in the federal government, in the House of Congress. So, right.
And then black men and women got the right to vote. The 15th and 19th Amendments, I believe, happened. But for those who I can't believe anyone would not know, but once black people got the right to vote, then Jim Crow came into existence to prevent them from voting. Can you give us some of that history?
Sure. So you're exactly right. The 15th Amendment gave black men the right to vote, known as, of course, men's suffrage movement. But the 19th Amendment gave all women, including black women, the right to vote. Now, of course, there is history between black and white suffrage and abolitionists during that time period, where white women thought that they should have had the right to vote before black men. But ultimately, in 1920, all women received the right to vote through the 19th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. However, even though the 15th Amendment was passed, states enacted policies and laws to intimidate, oppress, suppress the right to vote of black men. Case in point, they created laws such as grandfather clause. And if your grandfather didn't have the right to vote, then you couldn't vote. Well, of course they did. They were slaves. They didn't have any rights. They also created literacy tests. You had to be able to read certain provisions of maybe the U.S. Constitution or whatever document at that time the clerk of court provided to them. Also, very poll taxes, where you had to pay a certain amount in order to vote, which you shouldn't have to do anyway. That was illegal in our Constitution within itself. But also, Barbara, some ludicrous provisions, such as guess how many jelly beans in a jelly jar, how many bubbles are in a bar of soap. Those were real litmus tests for any black person that went to the poll to go vote.
And
Now,
Eric, were those? Excuse me for interrupting you for just a second, but I want to be.
fine.
I think this is important. Were those rules also in effect for white voters, or were they just for black voters?
They were just for black voters.
Okay. Because I think that people use that as an excuse sometimes. Well, that happened to everybody. It didn't happen to everyone.
No, it did not. As a matter of fact, when we talk about voter registration, we know that African Americans were intimidated to even register to vote, even killed. As a matter of fact, the leader of the NAACP in Mississippi was shot in the back of the head going into his home because he was fighting to register people to vote. We can look at what happened, the march from Selma to Montgomery. Of course, John Lewis and his story when they crossed the bridge. I mean, so these are violent actions which resulted in death of many individuals just to register to vote. Think about that. Just to register, not to bear arms, the Second Amendment, not to create certain processes or anything, just to put your name on the roll so that you can
vote.
Cast the vote.
So let's fast forward to 1965, and that's when the Voting Rights Act was enacted. Give us the sense of what that act meant, number one, and then secondly, why does it have to be revoted on or reapproved, if you will, every so often?
Sure. So the Voting Rights Act itself is probably, the second most powerful act protecting the rights of African Americans, more specifically, and other minority groups that were intimidated during a time period or not given full rights in our country as allocated by the U.S. Constitution and the amendments created to effectuate that. So with that, the 1965 Voting Rights Act was basically an act that was passed to protect African Americans, other minorities, for their rights to register, their rights to vote, and their right to participate fully in the political process. Now, keep in mind, we talked about what African Americans face in various southern states and other states, and we'll get to the significance of that in just a moment, just to vote. It was enacted in a time where you had decades in some areas in the South were not permitted to vote because of discriminatory practices that we just discussed. And Congress passed this Voting Rights Act, which was signed into law by Lyndon Johnson. And keep in mind, Lyndon Johnson signed some of the most sweeping legislation during his time period, a short time period as president, to protect and extend rights of all Americans. And what this did, after this act was signed into law and Congress passed it, it was in addition to permanent provisions banning racial discrimination, and also contained certain special provisions that protected rights of African Americans and other minority citizens in certain areas of the nation. So it was an extension of the 15th Amendment to protect certain rights to give African Americans and protect their right to vote, register, and participate fully. The part of, now that's permanent. The part of the Voting Rights Act that had to be renewed over again was the part of what we call Section 5. And that provision, where it prohibited some states and local bodies from creating laws, those Jim Crow laws, and stopping individuals from being able to vote. So with this, they would call what's called federally covered jurisdiction. They have to submit any plans, any laws, like the laws that we have that are circulating now in legislatures, to the federal government through the U.S. Department of Justice, first for what's called pre-clearance. And under that, the U.S. Department of Justice, their division would say, this, based upon the Voting Rights Act and based upon the law, this has an impact or disproportionate impact upon protected citizens in the state. You can't pass this. Whether it's redrawing lines based on the U.S. Census or just passing a provision as it relates to voting localities, placing ballot boxes, holding elections for a certain period of time during the day, like 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., all that had to be cleared by the U.S. Department of Justice to ensure that the rights of African Americans and other individuals, Black citizens or minority citizens, were not infringed upon.
So, for example, the laws that are being passed today in a lot of these states, had Section 5 not been struck down, they would have had to ask for permission in order to
Absolutely.
put these laws into place. And that's what was changed. So that's why they were allowed to just kind of go run free and make all these changes now, because no one has to get permission to do it.
Absolutely. So you're looking at Section 5 and Section 4, subsection B. Those areas, which creates it covers those states that discriminated historically against African Americans and other minorities. It created a formula for them as well. That's called coverage, and then it created preclearance. All of that was struck down and unconstitutional in Shelby County versus Holden.
And what was the Supreme Court's reasoning for striking that?
Well, they felt that the level of participation of African Americans and quote-unquote minorities in the country had reached such a level where they were not being infringed upon that they didn't need that anymore. States could be trusted for the most part. So they didn't want to put, from the ideological conservative standpoint, they didn't want to put that undue burden upon the states. Basically, states' rights, which is something that segregation has talked about to justify their actions. So it boiled down to that. But we knew in those states that the moment that case was decided, you would get these laws that would be passed that we see today.
So, Eric, most of these states are southern states, but they're not all southern states, are they, that are enacting some of these restrictive laws?
That is correct. So you have states such as Texas, which, of course, Texas is kind of an anomaly. It's not a southern state. It's not a Midwestern state or a northern state, but it's Texas, right? But Texas has always been a different type of state. And with Texas itself, they started enacting very strict laws as well. But you also had parts of California, Colorado, Hawaii, Idaho, New York, Wyoming, Connecticut, Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire. All these states were called the federally covered jurisdiction. But it included all of Alabama, all of Georgia, all of Louisiana, all of Mississippi, all of South Carolina, and all of Virginia.
And so where is Virginia in this mix?
Well, let's take a look at what's taking place so far. According to the Brennan Center, if you take a look currently to date, as of June 2021, we have 17 states that enacted new laws that restrict access to the voting box. Virginia itself is one of the states that have increased access to the voting box, to the ballot box. And Virginia itself is seen as a state that is probably what I call the model of what it used to be, turning the leaf toward a more progressive as relates to extending rights to individuals historically discriminated against. Okay, so I want to make that point for what we're talking about, especially as it relates to voting. So Virginia actually just passed Senate Bill 1395 and House Bill 1890, which are identical bills that prohibit discrimination through State Voting Rights Act. It's the only state that passed the Voting Rights Act on the state level, and the only southern state in the former Confederate state that did so as well. Of course, Virginia also increased, under that provision, they increased access to the voting box itself. They eased mail-in voting under Senate Bill 1097 and House Bill 1888. They also provided greater access to voters with disabilities, which is key, in Senate Bill 1245 and also Senate Bill 1331 and House Bill 1921. And then finally, they eased voter registration in House Bill 2125. So what we're seeing is that Virginia itself, in expanding the laws and its effect on voting, is opening up access and expanding early voting opportunities. And I can't forget about that one, which is House Bill 1968, because one thing that, of course, my family, my wife and I love about voting is we can vote early. And you don't have to vote. You can vote absentee without any excuse, which I thought was quite a burden. So it allows everyone to be able to vote at their own leisure, of course, on Saturdays as well, going up to the clerk's office or wherever you vote, or vote in a time period where it extends the hours because everybody works different hours. And, of course, Barbara, we all travel in Hampton Roads. It's kind of difficult to travel certain points of the time.
And also in Virginia, if I'm not mistaken, it's now a state holiday, Election Day. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
That is correct. So that's part of easing voting itself and opening up access.
Right.
So, exactly right.
We have a question from Facebook. They wanted some clarification, Eric. So was Virginia one of the states that was under the law that under Section 5? In other words, did they be prior? Did they have to get permission also to make changes?
Yes.
Okay. Kevin, I hope that answers your question. Let me put the numbers out. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Those are the numbers to call to join our conversation. Are you concerned about democracy? Are you concerned when you hear that there are states that are trying once again to disenfranchise Black and brown people in particular, and how these laws would affect all of us? 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. So now we're here in 2021. We've got the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act in the Senate, and we've got the For the People Act by Congress. Both of these have to be passed. Is that correct? Or at least we're trying to get both of them passed. What's the difference between the two?
Well, basically, what the John Lewis Voting Rights Act it's a bill that basically original title of the Voting Rights. Well, it's originally titled Voting Rights Act Advancement of 2019, but it was named after John Lewis after he passed away. Who is when you talk about a champion of the voting rights, I mean, he is the individual that we think about to be that. But for the most part, it was basically a Voting Rights Act that was proposed legislation to restore and strengthen parts of the Voting Rights Act in 1965 and certain portions that were struck down in Shelby County versus Holder. So basically, it was to provide pre-clearance in Section 4B. That was Section 4B in the Voting Rights Act itself in Section 5.
Okay, so we've got these two. They're languishing right now in both houses. What does the filibuster have to do with all of this?
Well, the filibuster itself is the ability to stall a bill itself, and it really gives the upper hand to individuals that want to obstruct passage of a lot of acts and bills that would progress civil rights itself. It was something that came about also during Jim Crow. So it really is, when we talk about Jim Crow 2.0, is really one of those provisions that was created as a tactic to prevent final passage of any type of law and measure, but more specifically, it works against laws in which you want to extend rights to the individuals.
Okay. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Robert joins us from Norfolk. Hi, Robert. You're on the air.
Hi, Barbara. I just wanted to say thank you for doing this program. As always, I think it's a wonderful program in particular.
Thank you.
I am 61 years old. I am Jewish, and I am a white male, and I understand prejudice, and I understand acts of hate. Mm-hmm. And I have to tell you that the laws that these people are trying to push in these Republican-led states, they're disgraceful and horrible. And yes, I think they're a definite danger to our democracy.
Okay, I'm going to ask our guests, and I'm wondering, Robert, what you think. What should we do about it?
We have to work to get the vote out. We have to go and make sure that places that are people who live in underserved communities, we have to give them a way to get to the ballot box. We also have to work very hard to make everyone aware of what's going on. And we have to change people's minds about what we're doing.
All right. Thanks so much for the call, Robert. We appreciate that. Eric, is this the time where we really should be? I know that there are several groups. Reverend Barber out of North Carolina with the Moral Mondays. They're getting ready to do a huge march in Texas to bring attention. There's marching going on in Washington. But when you hear from Joe Citizen, if you will, they're not really talking about this.
No, they're not. And it's one thing about public policy. Public policy moves very slow. But just like an avalanche moves very slow, the impact of it is massive. When it first starts, right? But then when it starts to roll downhill, it becomes massive, and the impact is great. And that's how public policy works. So we're not hearing a lot about it because there's not a lot of talk on the other stations. So there's a lot of talk on it on what individuals would call more democratic or liberal news outlets. I call them news attainment more so because Barbara, we look at classical journalism, the Dan Rathers and people of that nature, really going into it, just giving the facts, right? But
yeah, we got a lot of opinion out there now on both sides. On both sides,
without facts. So you don't hear this on the conservative news entertainment stations, and really it's because this is part of the playbook. If we take a look at individuals who have, as a caller stated, they have enacted a lot of these discriminatory practices, it's the same individuals. And it's from the exact same playbook. There's nothing different about it. And listeners, if you go to Google or your search engine, you can hear Rick Santorum. He was taped saying that they don't want the will of the people to be done because the U.S. Constitution was created to protect the rights of the minority. And when he talks about the minority, he's talking about the ruling minority. White males with power, right? Yeah. So this is in a meeting that, of course, is secretly recorded, where he talks about this, and where they also talk about giving Joe Manchin, like we love Joe Manchin. He's a Democrat, but he's doing the will of the Republican Party because now they don't have to be the bad guy. Let Joe Manchin be the bad guy. And really, if we remove the filibuster, Barbara, and if Joe Manchin sides with his party on this, then they could pass these bills very easily, and they can go and as it relates to voting, again, as it relates to voting rights, very easily. And as a federal law, it could be protected, period. That's all you need, and all of this goes away as being unconstitutional.
Wow.
But
it's not happening right now. If you're just joining us, we're talking about efforts to restrict the vote, particularly in Black and Brown communities, with Dr. Eric Claville, director of the Center for African American Public Policy at Norfolk State University. He's also the host of State of the Water, heard on WNSB FM Public Radio at NSU. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Vernon joins us from Newport News. Hi, Vernon. You're on the air.
Hi. Good
Hi.
afternoon, everybody.
How you doing?
All right.
Good.
I'm always very pleased when I hear a doctor on the radio because I really think it's an important voice. But moving on, I just think it's weird or strange how history is trying to repeat itself. We had the Republicans originally being the proponents of voting rights for former slaves.
Vernon, can you speak more into your phone? Because we're
Yes.
losing you. There.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
The Republicans originally were the proponents
Mm-hmm.
for slaves or former slaves, and the Democrats, which I don't think they were called Democrats at the time, were the opposition. And then you had the transition from the people leaving the Democratic Party because of segregation in the 50s and 60s and moving to the Republican Party. And now we have the Republican Party becoming the opposition to black people voting or people of color voting. And I just think we can't allow history to repeat itself.
Okay, let me get a response from Dr. Claville. Eric?
Well, first of all, Colin, thank you so much. It's always good to be on Another View here on WHRV and WHRO and really talk about these issues. But, you know, he's right. I mean, when you see a population, I mean, think about it. The ruling minority that started the country has always been less in number. So in order to create the policies that they wanted to create to keep their rule, they had to cheat, right? So cheating is you had to deny people certain rights and activities, full participation in America. First started with Native Americans, then blacks and slaves, which became African Americans, and also women. Keep in mind, white women did not have full rights.
Mm-hmm.
So you keep this in a small box. So as they're forced, this ruling minority is forced to allow individuals that are not like them to participate fully in the American experiment, then you create these policies. Because really, the details are in the policy. That's where the rubber meets the road in our democracy. You create these policies and these rulings on various courts in order to limit the impact of individuals who were not really thought of in the very beginning to have a full play in the American experiment. So, Barbara, I will say this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in today's politics, if you're not ready to take the gloves off, if you're not ready to really get out there and put it all on the line, then this is the wrong profession for you. Because at this point, on both sides, you know, they're getting ready for the fight. Well, definitely on the conservative side, they're ready. And their playbook is 100 years in the future, 50 to 100 years. And that's one thing that, as a strategist, you have to tip your hat to. You got to tip your hat to, as I call it, Justice McConnell.
Well, you know, it's interesting because they you're right. I mean, they take on a very specific perspective and stick to it. And it feels like on the Democratic side, we're still trying to be inclusive and we're still trying to bring people together and, you know, and so forth. And meanwhile, nothing's happening. And I think that's what the big concern is. But I want to ask you a question about the Texas Democrats. So these are Texas Democratic legislators who literally left the state and went to D.C. in order to stop the vote in Texas because Republicans were trying to put forth a bunch of bills that were very restrictive. What happens at the end of August? I think it's August 7th when their special session is supposed to be over. They've been threatened with being arrested when they come back to the state. And what would stop the governor from saying, well, okay, on August 9th, we're going back into session and they're in the state? Right. I mean, is this tactic going to work is my question.
Sooner or later, Barbara, it's going to wear thin and it's not going to work. The governor's just going to call another special session, and they can't keep leaving the state like that, which is why they were in Washington saying we need a federal law. And it's basically the John Lewis Act that restores pre-clearance for the most part. So until that happens, I mean, that's where we are. But when you talk about nothing's happening, right? So keep in mind, there are certain factions in our country, in our democracy, where it doesn't matter who's in office. The wheels are going to keep churning. And the main wheels is the wheels of capitalism. So that's going to happen. All right. So whether it's Trump in office, whether it's Barack Obama, Joe Biden, Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton, the Bushes, the economic wheels continue to churn. And unfortunately, the military wheels keep churning. Well, fortunately it does, but, as it relates to the military-industrial complex, which some people disagree with and have issues with, it keeps churning as well. But we do have a strong country because of our strong military. So that is the one great thing about our country as well. But Barbara, as it relates to expanding rights, you talk about bringing factions together. One thing about the conservative side, it's a small faction that's losing members as individuals get older, but it's a very strong faction. All right, it's a strong group. They coalesce around their issues, and they're not going to move. Even though they may disagree with individuals that are there, they're not going to move. However, on the Democratic side, you have so many different groups that you have to bring together and satisfy at one time. It becomes cumbersome, and also it sometimes, well, first of all, you're not going to satisfy everybody.
Right.
So that's why it's very important to have leaders in those various groups to say, hey, we're going to shoot for this main goal, and these ancillary goals, we'll put them there, and we can do it in the beginning, or when an administration is leading out, we can get it done then. But we have to shoot for these main goals first.
440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Chuck joins us from Williamsburg. Hi, Chuck. You're on the air.
Hi, Barbara. I wanted to thank you and Dr. Claville for this great show.
Thank you.
He's explaining things so that even somebody thick and old as I am can understand it, and I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for the call, Chuck. We appreciate it.
Okay.
Eric, you do break things down, and this is why I wanted to do this show, because I think it is so important that people understand what's behind all of this and what this means. Reverend Barber, William Barber, as I said, he's planning this massive Selma-type march in Texas, and they're going to be doing that coming up next week, as a matter of fact. And he said this, Eric. He said, quote, "It is a mistake to think that racism only impacts Black people. It impacts us all, and the collective impact necessitates a collective response." My question to you is, how do we, as the citizens, as we're watching this drama in Washington, what do we need to do to coalesce to put pressure on these people to get these laws passed?
Well, Barbara, it really boils down to not just being engaged, but staying engaged. And that's really the hard thing about politics and public policy, is that it's easy to get a march. It's easy to get individuals to galvanize around a hot topic. But to get individuals to stay, to get individuals to lock in on various provisions, that's a very hard situation, because it's kind of like watching paint dry. And a lot of individuals just don't have that. I mean, I love it. I mean, I watch it every day. I fill up on C-SPAN, and then, 1, 2, and 3 on the weekends and so forth. Of course, my kids know not to come in the room when Dad's watching C-SPAN, but, but most people can't do that. And that's really one of the tricks of how public policy is created for the ruling minority, as opposed to the majority. So the best thing to do is that every organization should have an individual that's appointed to do just that, and to bring back those reports in every organization, whether it be churches, whether it be civic groups, whatever it may be, in order to have that one person to provide information back to their group and to submit, at least once a month, correspondences to their representatives that represent them. That's really the only way to get it done, because if the politicians don't recognize that the people's patience is waning thin, it's going to be hard to get people back to the polls to vote for something that's not going to happen or hasn't happened.
Right. Let me we got a bunch of calls, so I'm going to try to make sure we get them in. Kelly joins us from Chesapeake. Hi, Kelly. You're on the air.
Hi there. So I'm coming from curiosity, not confrontation.
Okay.
So that's That's the first thing I want to say. But I'm a white female, but I'm curious because I've never seen more racism in my life. And I feel like it's happened within the last 2 years. So what I don't understand is why this is being considered a racial issue instead of refining voting and making sure that politicians on either side aren't cheating. And it's really frustrating to me because I don't have a prejudiced bone in my body, but I've got it's coming at us so quickly that that the minority folks are being wronged. I don't believe that by and large.
Okay, let me let Eric answer you because I want to make sure we have enough time because your question is very important, Kelly, and I want him to be able to respond to it. Thanks for the call. Eric, go ahead. She wants to know why is this a black-white thing?
Right. So what we're seeing now, and that's a very common question with a lot of persons. So I'm going to say, and I'm just going to use this as an example. So in suburbia USA, you're not going to see a lot of this because there's suburbia USA kind of has a kind of a set and standard group that exists there. But what has happened is individuals who have been affected by racism have always endured it and seen it. The difference is now we have what's called social media. Now we have recordings that are being taken, and people see it. Black people have been saying all along that police have been harassing and abusing their power. In 2020, we saw it. People have been saying all the time that black people, when they come into a conference, the reason why we don't call police when in an interaction with someone of another race, more specifically white, is because they're going to believe the white person. And we saw that with now the phenomenon called the Karens, where individuals are calling, literally lying. Mm-hmm. And then when the police come, they actually believe the lie. And it takes a video to prove the lie wrong. So racism has always been happening in packing. It's not just a black-white thing. It's just that people now in suburbia USA are just seeing it. And when you look at the video and you see it, can't really deny it.
Well, the other thing, too, though, are the laws that are being passed in these states disproportionately affect people of color because they are restrictive in ways that people who have privilege or who have the ability to navigate this country and don't have to worry about all of the issues that a lot of minority communities have to worry about, they have access to the poll. They're not the ones standing in line for hours and not being allowed to get a bottle of water. Absolutely. As this new law is saying.
Yeah, Barbara, you're exactly right. And as it relates to the caller's question when it comes to voting rights, and I wanted to utilize the example of the summer of 2020 and seeing social justice, and then what we've always been saying is happening has happened. As it relates to voting rights, it's the same. It's the same principle. When you look at the rules. The rules say you can't give anyone a bottle of water in Florida and Georgia or snacks. That's a criminal statute now. It's illegal to give somebody water and snacks. You could be arrested for that. And what's happening now is we're seeing in these areas where individuals don't have a lot of locations to vote, they're taking a lot of those locations away, like what's happening in North Carolina as well. It was Greensboro or Greensboro?
I believe it's Greensboro, yes. And even in Texas, they were talking about only having one drop-off ballot box in the county that houses Houston, the city of Houston. And they were going to have one drop-off ballot box. So the restrictions...
The restrictions, Barbara, to your point, it may be 5 minutes away, but 5 minutes in Houston traffic. That's like another state for a lot of other people. So exactly right.
Yes. So that makes it very, very different. Let's see if we can get Donald in from Virginia Beach. Hi, Donald. You're on the air. Donald?
Okay, Barbara, good afternoon.
Hi.
Thank you for taking my call.
Uh-huh.
My question is, it seems that we are questioning, that the Republicans are questioning the validity of the vote and the right to vote. my question is, I haven't seen many people or seen it on many news reels about if they're questioning the people vote. What about those Republicans who were elected in these same elections?
Good point. Let's let Eric respond to you. Thanks so much for the call, Donald. Did you understand him, Eric?
Yeah, I think so. I think it kind of goes to the argument that Donald Trump raised. If he wins the election, then it wasn't fraud. If he doesn't win, then it had to be fraudulent. So what's happening is that when you talk about individuals who are elected in those elections who are Republican or conservative, you have to look at the districts in which they are being elected in. So there's really not going to be an issue because we're getting the people elected that they want to vote. Now, when we look at statewide elections, primarily when you talk about the laws restricting access to the ballot box, that's in states where the population that is more sides with Democratic policies than Republican policies and agree with the Democratic side are increasing or have increased, and Republicans haven't won elections in those statewide races. A great example is the Commonwealth of Virginia. When was the last time we had a Republican Republican governor here in the state that won statewide office? We haven't in several election cycles. So that's where you see the restrictions coming about. In states where you don't see the restrictions, there's really not a big hoopla about it because the population there fits the narrative for the individuals that they want to elect to office.
So, Eric, we've got about 2 minutes left. The push for people in the states where there have been restrictions passed, how do we keep them engaged and not become cynical because they've got all of this, but to fight through despite the restrictions and still vote? You got a minute.
Yeah. So very quickly, I mean, you basically have to, it's understanding the rules. Just like in sports, when the visiting team goes to someone else's home court, you have to understand that the rules are the same, but they're applied a little differently. So in every election, where it's right now in the United States of America, there's a shift that's taking place. There's a shift in the majority having a lot more input in the process. So now the rules, there's a fight over the rules. So we just have to be more engaged in understanding each election what the rules are. And that's really on the parties and the individuals who are running for office to help to educate their voters to get the message out and to get their individuals to the polls and deliver on the policies that they say that they would deliver on.
Exactly. And you did very, very well. We got 30 seconds. So the bottom line is, regardless, we still need to vote. Because if we don't vote, then it continues to get to more restrictions can come. And we don't want to go to a place where we don't have the right to vote anymore. Correct?
Absolutely.
That's Dr. Eric Claville, the director of the Center for African American Public Policy at Norfolk State University. Thanks so much, Eric. We appreciate you, and we'll be right back.
I'm with Marcellus, and you all are checking out Another View. Don't go anywhere. Check us out.
And welcome back. Maestro Thomas Wilkins will soon return to his roots. The Norfolk native is coming home to serve as the principal guest conductor of the Virginia Symphony Orchestra. Wilkins calls his return poetic in that he'll be leading the orchestra that first introduced him to his life's work. And he shared with our Lisa Godley how the opportunities he's experienced right here in Hampton Roads have shaped his life.
I was living in Youngs Park. In fact, I often talk about the fact that I could see the arena from my bedroom window, but I had no idea what went on in that building. And then sure enough, my third grade class gets on a bus and goes there, and there's this thing called the Norfolk Symphony. The conductor was Russell Stanger, and I'd never heard an orchestra before. And this man comes out, he stands on the podium, the orchestra stands up, and they started to play the Star Spangled Banner. which I had heard before, but never in the voice of the orchestra. And all of it captured me in every pore of my being. And I knew before that hour was over that I wanted that job. I wanted the job of standing in the midst of all of that sound, which is weird for an 8-year-old to know your life's calling.
That same year, Thomas Wilkins started playing the violin. 2 years later, he would switch to the cello, and by the 7th grade, a new instrument had captured his attention.
I learned to play trumpet at Jaycox Junior High School. A lot of my friends were in the band, and those guys wore uniforms, and I thought, well, that's pretty cool. I got to figure out a way to get me a uniform, you know? Actually, I learned the fingerings for trumpet so that I could go to summer band camp and sort of be ahead of the game. And sure enough, I was able to be both in the band and the orchestra in junior high school. And this is how beautiful the whole thing is. I was invited to try to conduct my junior high school orchestra. And sure enough, after some trepidation, I got up on the podium and did it. And then I became like the student conductor of the junior high school orchestra. I mean, it was one gift from God after another. I was a kid to a single mother. She couldn't afford to buy me an instrument. And the band director said, I'm short on tuba players. If you switch to tuba, I'll let you keep one at home. And I went, sold. So much to the chagrin of my neighbors, I became a tuba player in the band and a cello player in the orchestra. But the other thing that happened that was really powerful for me was that I went to Booker T, and a man by the name of Reginald Walker, who was a renowned local musician, was the band director. And he just embraced my love for conducting, and he just made me his student conductor. And I conducted every day in high school. And so that's an incredible experience. Of course, I didn't know what I was doing, but I was still conducting. And so I got a chance to learn what leadership of people feels like and what having people respond to my musical gestures feels like at a very early age. And that just paved the way for my post-high school education.
Over the years, Thomas Wilkins has used his skills and talent to teach music at universities like Virginia Commonwealth and the University of Tennessee, and he's conducted orchestras all over the country, including the Boston Symphony and the Hollywood Bowl. And he's never forgotten those who helped pave his way so that he could pave the way for the next generation of musicians. I asked him to describe his process for conducting, and this is just a portion of what he shared.
The music that's in front of me, of course, a Beethoven symphony or Tchaikovsky symphony, whatever it is, that's like a set of instructions, or rather it's like a set of blueprints. And it's as if you have to take those blueprints and rebuild that house, but you have to build it in a manner that you can live in it. And so there's some structural things that are there. I often say that score study is a combination of both emotion and intellect. You can't have only intellect because then you don't have art, and you can't have only emotion because then you don't have integrity. So you have to combine what the composer gives you and then what you feel. Whatever I'm conducting at the time, I'm in love with. I just did Beethoven's Third Symphony with the Seattle Symphony a couple of weeks ago, and now I'm about to do a concert at the Hollywood Bowl with Ledisi, and now I'm in love with Ledisi's music. I mean, so it's, I don't create labels. I just enjoy where I am at the time.
For Another View, I'm Lisa Godley.
And Thomas Wilkins' first appearance with the Virginia Symphony Orchestra in his new role will be February 18th through 20th of 2022. It was truly my pleasure to serve as the MC for his welcoming back that was conducted by the Virginia Symphony this week. Thanks so much for listening to our show today, and I hope it has inspired you to get involved in our political process and make sure you vote. If you'd like to check out this show again, you can find the podcast at our website, anotherviewradio.org. We're on Facebook, and I'm on Twitter at Barbara Ham Lee. Before we go, please, if you are not vaccinated, get your shot. This Delta variant of COVID-19 is very serious, and there are way too many Black folks who are at risk because they haven't been vaccinated. It's probably a good idea for all of us to start wearing our masks again as the virus is rapidly spreading. Protect yourself and your loved ones and the rest of us and get your shot. Our theme music is an original composition, especially for Another View by Jay Sennett. Lisa Godley is our show producer. Todd Washburn is our audio engineer, and Dr. Barry Graham answered our phones. Our interns are Brianna Walton and Lane Burgess. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Be smart, be safe, get your shot, and join us next Thursday at noon for Another View.
Support comes from Hampton Roads Community Foundation, partnering with donors from all walks of life to improve southeastern Virginia through grants, scholarships, and leadership initiatives. Learn more at hamptonroadscf.org.